Hey guys, catching up on the week stories with my man David Pakman, and I saw some video here, which we're going to show you in just a sec, of Syrian women who escaped ISIS and ended up in a Kurdish-controlled area. Kurds are an ethnic minority that are in Turkey and in Syria that we really don't talk about enough. They're trying to fight for their own state. That's a whole other topic. But I thought this video was pretty incredible because it shows you the level of repression that people, especially women, have to live with in ISIS-controlled areas versus what happens when they leave. So let's take a look. All right, so it's pretty incredible stuff. I mean, literally shedding the clothes that ISIS forces them to wear and can actually be themselves. It's pretty much the most human thing there possibly is. Pakman, why don't we see more of these images? This is powerful stuff, don't you think?
Well, I think there's probably two reasons and maybe even more, but one of the reasons is that it's maybe not happening enough as we would like it to happen. And number two is that when it is happening, there's probably some level of fear with regard to documenting and sort of divulging and spreading this type of media. And that would be just for all the reasons that you and I have discussed in the past as to why fear is a very effective way to control people. So I think that it's not happening nearly enough. And when it does happen, it's not always going to even make it to YouTube.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to do this story, because to me, it was such a obvious example of repression and, you know, the human desire to be free. And you're seeing it. It seems to me that more, I don't know why women's rights groups and gay rights groups aren't speaking up more against ISIS. You know what I mean? We talked about this once before, just that it seems like all these minority groups and these groups that stand up for the other, it seems that they should be the ones talking about what we should do about ISIS. And again, I don't know that we should do anything. Maybe all other countries in the area need to do more. Often we do things and it just ends up worse. But it seems like the minority groups should be speaking out more, don't you think?
There's this interesting thing along those lines. A couple years ago, I did a media training with a LGBT rights organization that I was going to be doing some media appearances with. And I won't say which one it was, just because maybe they don't want it to be public that this is how they do their media trainings. But there was a discussion about never equating or comparing the struggle for LGBT rights to any other struggle in history. And the logic of it, that as I was told it was, listen, there may be parallels, but you don't ever want to speak for another group's battle that they fought. So we want to have our messaging around LGBT rights stand completely on its own with regard to the merits. And I was sort of taken aback by this, because I think it's absolutely important to point out that the struggle for racial integration, or whatever struggle there is, it is, of course, its own struggle with its own players, but it's to me silly to ignore that the forces often fighting against equality actually are, in a sense, united or are related. So I actually did not think that that was a good approach.
Yeah, I have a feeling that I know which organization you went to, because they asked me to do media training too, which I said no, because that just seems crazy. Like, I can't be controlled by anyone. But yeah, I agree with you. It seems like there are all these awful forces that stand against so many of the things that are good about Western values and progressive values and women's rights and gay rights and income equality and things of that nature. So I really don't understand why you'd want to keep all these groups kind of splintered. I just don't get it.
And I do understand that, you know, to analyze the example I gave, right, which was the struggle for racial integration and civil rights in the 60s and the LGBT rights movement now, we know that there actually is a portion of the more religious Black community that actually doesn't share support for the LGBT rights movement. And we saw that in California with the Prop 8 vote. So I actually, with that particular example, you could conceivably make the argument that actually the players in the movements don't necessarily agree. But I think that's a completely separate issue from whether we should be drawing parallels between other movements and movements that we see today. And absolutely what's going on with ISIS should be part of that.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So, final thought on this. So, every time we do an ISIS story, I bring it up, that we in America, look, you can blame George Bush for going into Iraq, which then ultimately led to ISIS. You could blame Obama because he's been president for 6 years. He pulled out of Iraq, which everyone wanted us to get out of Iraq, left this vacuum. Now Iraq basically is not a country. It really isn't a country by any standard definition. Syria is crumbling. Lebanon is teetering. Jordan is teetering. What do you think we're supposed to do? I don't know. We talk about this almost every week, and we make things worse. But it seems to me at some point here, ISIS is starting to become the new Nazis. They're not even hiding what their goals are. And at some point, maybe we have to try something different.
Yeah, it's so tough for me to think about this because on the one hand, as we started to talk about ISIS months ago, there's this obvious, anybody who's rational and sort of connected to the history of the situation understands that there is some responsibility that the United States bears for creating significant responsibility. Let me not understate it, for creating the vacuum in which ISIS came to power, no doubt about it. The question on which many people would disagree is, how far does that responsibility go in terms of what we need to do going forward? At some point, maybe it's okay for the U.S. to say this is as far as it goes.
Right. So is that the irony of sort of the liberal position? Because I think most people on the left, I think that's what they're saying. They're acknowledging Bush started this thing, Obama got us out, perhaps both screwed up in their own way. But at some point, you just got to cut it and let it go. And I understand that line of thinking. And I'm not saying we should do anything. I know that just today, I think they announced they're sending 500 more troops to train Iraqis. We know that's not going to do much because it hasn't been doing anything for the last couple of years. But I think this is where liberals are sort of caught between like having a principled stand on seeing some really awful shit and knowing we can do something about it versus, we don't want to be in every part of the world. And sometimes you just got to let it be. So it's a strange dichotomy.
At a certain point, I think the line will sort of have to be drawn, and it may be 20 years in. I don't know. I mean, I hope that it's not. I hope there's resolution before it gets to having to make that call, but no question about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, what do you guys think? It's a big mess. I know we all agree on that, but should we be doing more? Should our allies in the area be doing more? Is there anything that can be done, or do we just leave it up to the Iraqis and the Syrians and see what happens? Let us know your thoughts in the comments right down below.